Okay, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Everybody have a good little break there. I know it was short, but we're doing what we can. So the International Space Station, this thing that we've been talking about, it's supported by an ever-growing network of companies that actively elevate the caliber of research and technology development on this unique and amazing platform. One of those companies is Nanoracks, led by Jeffrey Manber. Nanoracks has been one of the pioneers in customer utilization for low Earth orbit, so it'll be great to hear his thoughts. Speaking with Jeff today is Mike Reed from NASA's Johnson Space Flight Center. Mike is the manager of International Space Station Business and Economic Development Office. In this capacity, he enables a broad commercial participation in low Earth orbit, leveraging the assets and infrastructure of this amazing platform, the ISS. So with that, Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you, and so you can get started in this conversation with Jeffrey.
All right, thank you, Jim. It's my pleasure today to introduce our industry spotlight speaker, Mr. Jeffrey Manber of Nanoracks. Jeff has served as the CEO of Nanoracks since 2009, and more recently as chairman of the board of Exo Markets, the parent company of Nanoracks. Nanoracks literally started in a garage in Webster, Texas, and has grown into a market leader in democratizing access to space. Most recently, he led the successful exit for Nanoracks shareholders with the acquisition of the company by Voyager Space Holdings. Today, Nanoracks has customers in over 30 countries, ranging from governments to universities to corporations. As the only American to ever work officially for the Russian space station program, his prior experience includes serving as a managing director of Energia USA, and he represented the Russian space program when the basic contracts to enable the International Space Station were negotiated. In the 1990s, Jeff was CEO of Mir Corp, which leased the Russian space station Mir for a broad range of commercial activities, which has led to his passion for expanding the commercial use of space, now leveraging the ISS. He is the author of 3 books, including Selling Peace, which chronicles his time working with the Russians. Jeff is no stranger to Congress or the White House, having testified on the Hill numerous times, as well as presenting to the National Space Council. He is a recipient of the NASA Exceptional Public Achievement Medal, as well as the Space Frontier Foundation's Pioneer of New Space Award, among others. So Jeff, welcome, and thank you for participating today.
Hey, it's great to be here, Mike. Thanks for inviting me.
So Jeff, to get things rolling, why don't you tell us give us the state of Nanoracks, and then from your perspective, how you see the new space industry in general.
Well, it's a fascinating time. I mean, it's a tale of 2 cities. We're coming out of the pandemic, let's hope, and things did slow down, though in space we had to keep going and we hit our milestones. And during the pandemic, we launched the Bishop Airlock, which is now a permanent addition to the International Space Station that was commercially funded. And so it's a wonderful example of some of the things we'll talk about today, and the growing maturity of the public-private partnerships between NASA and industry. And yet, you know, we're doubling down on the International Space Station, and yet at the same time, we're beginning to look at a new era of commercial space stations. Because as you well know, Mike, in the space business, you can't wait till a year or 2 years before. And we have to start planning as to what happens as the ISS begins to retire at the end of this decade. And so it's a fascinating time where we're looking at the ISS and how we can increase the demand side utilization. And yet we're also looking at other platforms that we can utilize. I think you're on mute.
I'm still technically challenged 16 months into this. The industry seems to be reaching kind of an inflection point to me. There's an awful lot of capital that's coming off the sidelines. Just either recently or in the past 12 months or so, Voyager acquiring Nanoracks is one big piece of it. Redwire acquired Made in Space. Astra went public, and Planet Labs has announced intentions to go public. So what's changed, and what does that signal? Is the industry, the new space industry, becoming a little more mature, or is there just less risk, or what, from your perspective, why has that changed?
It's a fascinating question. We sort of sit around and try and think that everything we worked for, 2 decades ago is beginning to be realized now. So, let's go back to, let's say 10, 12 years ago. NASA was beginning to look at a new way post-shuttle. How do you work with the private sector? How do you get cargo? And then one day, how do you get people to and from the space station? And they elected to go down a new path. And folks like myself and others were saying, why don't we try a new pathway where the government is a customer and behaves more in a commercial setting as best the government can? And of course, NASA, went out and did commercial cargo, more recently commercial crew, where it was revolutionary. They didn't design the vehicle, and the companies had to be successful in order to get paid, to realize revenue. And you know what, Michael? After 5, 6, 7 years, it began to permeate through the rest of our space community, the human space community. And I think investors took note of that. And I'd like to think Nanoracks has played a role in by showing we could work with NASA in a commercial manner by investing in our hardware on the space station. We have customers in over 30 countries now. We have customers throughout the government as a whole, industry, high schools. And so I think what's happened is there's been these seeds that have been germinating for a decade now. And we're also in a good time economically, but the investors are realizing you can have exits, whether it's an acquisition, and now this whole going public is extraordinary. And I'd like to say one other thing, if I may. One of the fascinating things about these companies going public is they now have currency, they have stock, they have equity. And when you talk about the maturing of the public-private partnership, before Nanoracks might say somehow we'll come up with, like on the Bishop, we self-funded that, that was close to $20 million. But as we move forward, there are space companies and launch vehicles and destinations and in-space services and constellations that can bring a lot more capital to the table, thereby making the government more and more a customer. So it is an exciting time where NASA and other agencies can behave more as they do in other markets. It's still an immature market, space, in-space services especially, but step by step, we're getting to be more mature. Having all these companies, this range of companies going public is a wonderful development.
So from your perspective, that only girds the new space industry from seeing all this investor interest and especially with the going public through SPACs or IPOs or whatever, that it shows a broad investor interest, or is it a niche?
Well, one person's broad interest is another person's niche. Okay, space remains a niche. It may, of course, there's never been this excitement, in large part because of the involvement of 2 of the richest people on the planet, of course, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. And that's captured the imagination. I can't tell you, not as much now, but for a long period of time, people, when I said I was in the space community, people would ask if I had anything to do with, was it the red Tesla going up on the Falcon Heavy, so people watch that kind of thing and it generates interest, it's generated excitement. And so there are reasons for us to be concerned. I don't want to say anything negative about my colleagues, but at Voyager, we have concerns about the SPAC approach. Dylan Taylor, the CEO of Voyager, has made clear that he has sought to have Voyager go public in the next few months via a traditional IPO, which is more rigorous. We do have concerns that in the inevitable downtime, how do these publicly traded SPACs that did not go through the rigorous process of being evaluated with third parties, looking at the revenue projections and really digging in, how will the community of space-based SPACs and all SPACs hold up in the next downturn, that's a concern. We might be talking in a few years and saying, gosh, it was a great time, but then there was the recession and a lot of these companies get acquired. But that's the way it works in our marketplace. So in general, there is a broad range of interest now. You have hedge funds, family funds, the public, all coming to get banks. You have debt, you have equity, all coming together and saying, we believe that with the government as customer, there is a base of demand, and that we can see the commercialization of the customers happening, whether satellite constellations or in-space services, big data. So it's a very, very exciting time, but we also do have to be cautious. There will be fallouts, there will be down cycles, and we have to be ready for that.
Yeah, we mentioned that Nanoracks was basically, you like to say that it started with your first investors were MasterCard and Visa, I think I've heard you say, and literally did start in a garage. But one of the things that I've observed over, well, almost a decade of being familiar with Nanoracks now and watching you grow is that it's a nimble company. You're very flat in your organizational structure. And so your decision-making has been, you've been able to adapt. But you gain access to capital with the new investors, and especially with going public, but does that take away some of the nimbleness that has allowed companies like Nanoracks and other small new space companies to adapt?
It's a great question, one that we thought about long and hard. The answer is, what is the capital behind you? So first off, thank you. We are and we were very nimble. We started with small nano labs. We then went to satellite deployments. We have our external platform outside the station. Each time it got more complex, the Bishop airlock. Now we're looking at other platforms as well. So you're correct, we have built it up. You are also correct, implicit in your question, Mike, is that we raised very little capital at Nanoracks during the 10 years before the acquisition by Voyager. If I had been backed by certain VCs at year 2, they would have shut us down at year 3 when the nanolab internal pressurized market never really took off. And that's a subject of another discussion, never really has taken off the way we wanted. And the result was we adjusted and we got involved into the satellite deployment, and we think we helped launch Spire and Planet and a whole host of other ventures. A whole ecosystem was nurtured by Nanoracks working with you, Michael, and others at NASA, and we helped create this market that now employs thousands of people, has valuations probably over $1 billion, and has made America a leader in CubeSats and CubeSat deployment. So we were able to pivot because we didn't have capital that said stay on the business plan. There are certain companies that have capital behind them that forces them to be less nimble than they were before. And there's no point to name. There are certain companies, colleagues of mine, competitors of mine, who have capital behind them that has still allowed them to be flexible. And one of the things I like about Voyager and Dylan Taylor and Matt, the COO, is that they say over and over, we're in this for the long haul. And after we deployed the Bishop airlock, they said, okay, we're willing to make some investments now. What are the next things we need to invest in? And no offense to my friends in the legacy aerospace companies, but that's very difficult. In the legacy aerospace companies, to be able to move forward on a program with no government funding and maybe even no government awareness they want these services yet, is one of the problems of the legacy aerospace companies. They have to answer to so many people. They have to justify in so many different ways. They cannot, as often as companies like ours, they can't invest their own funds in the future ahead of the government. So it's a long answer, but you're correct that private capital may make these companies less nimble. And it may, for some companies, they don't want to be nimble anymore. They want to implement. And that may be true also with Nanoracks. We sure got a heck of a lot on our plate to implement on commercial space stations and other. We're doing space farming now. We may touch on that. So the answer to your question is, when we began talking to Voyager, we realized it was a coming together of minds. They're willing and happy to have us stay nimble. They know it's in our DNA. But others may not be as fortunate, and others may not want that.
So it's the color of the money that matters.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey,
And some folks don't realize that. So
I want to double back just a little bit in time.
Yeah.
You had a pretty unique viewpoint in the 90s with some efforts to commercialize a low Earth orbit platform with Mir. And you did some commercial activities there. Here we are 25 years later, we're making significant strides to do something similar but different with space station. Our government goal is to be, as we say, one of many customers. Right now, we are a major anchor tenant to the space station, right? And even more. Our goal eventually is to not have to do that, but that we still are always going to need some kind of a low Earth orbit platform. So given your catbird seat from the 90s with Mir, and now you're right in the vanguard of what we're doing with commercialization of LEO, leverage, and station. Are there similarities, or are there structural differences? And if so, what lessons can we learn from what worked or didn't work in the 90s, and compare that to our methods now? And are we doing things that seem to make sense, or are we stepping on our own toes? You know, you have a unique perspective on this, and I don't think I've ever asked you this question before.
And I'm hesitating, and I see my dear friend Jeff Bingham has asked a question about what is the best sense of the follow-on platforms to ISS, and so I may weave it all in. And I'm also smiling because it's a sensitive subject. So I'm very proud that at Energia, and then later as CEO of Mir Corp, the Dutch company that leased the Russian space station Mir for several years, I sure learned a heck of a lot about commercial utilization of a space station. And it's what's interesting to me, Mike, is that when the Mir came down, we were unsuccessful in a business sense because the Mir came down for a variety of practical and political reasons. But I had 170 million in backlog. Okay, I had signed Dennis Tito, who later went with Space Adventures to ISS, but I had signed him to his launch contract. I had Mark Burnett of Survivor. We were going to do a game show on the station. I had pharmaceutical research. So I had a business backlog, actually more than I've been able to generate at Nanoracks through the ISS. Why is that? And the best answer I can give is that one of the reasons is that being unable at Nanoracks and the ISS to control the brand that is ISS, you lose that market niche advantage of driving utilization in the way that fits your desires. At Nanoracks, we work proudly and closely with NASA and public-private partnerships, but having a station, a platform controlled by multiple governments probably does limit the media, the branding, the things you can do. And so what I see moving forward is I honestly believe within the next decade, there will be multiple free flyers, not one. There will be free flyers that are hotels for the rich. Maybe there'll be the Virgin platform, or so the Virgin Hotel, and there'll be ones that are habitats for professional astronauts, training maybe to go to Mars. We're interested in greenhouses, and we're interested in some of the science and technology at Nanoracks. So I think that the lessons are the ISS was a political station as well as a technical marvel. But the rules and regulations that have to be in place do limit the market of what you can do. And the technology, gosh, what would be the technology on the ISS? Probably the 1980s technology. What we can probably do with 2020 technology will allow more things and more cost-efficient levels. And I believe there'll be market niches coming that allows you to specialize. And we'll also encourage in-space, transportation and development. So I think that answers your question. That on the Mir, I had to focus on media and branding, and I was completely in charge of the whole story. And so we could do that. At ISS, Nanoracks fits in within NASA rules, the IGA that runs the ISS. You and I know how many times our friends of the other space agencies might call over to you all and say, what's going on? So you have to be more cautious.
Yeah, let's pursue just a minute there. The one thing we've seen over a decade of implementing the National Lab is that creating or generating a stable, non-governmental demand is hard. And we look back several years ago at most of the investments we've been making in new capabilities and everything was all on the supply side. But absent the demand side, we're always going to be that primary user, and that's just not sustainable. So how do we go about developing what would be a scalable, sustainable demand, non-governmental demand for a platform? And we've made some efforts, but government is probably woefully suited to try to create that. All we can do is set out an environment to enable creative companies to see opportunities. And so that's what we've tried to do. But are there things we should be doing differently that might lead to more successful outcomes in the demand side?
Okay, we got 20 minutes into this, and I've been polite. So, let me just say a few things, Mike, here. First off, you said it yourself slightly. Let me focus on it. One of my beefs is the way that the government in general has been focused on the supply side and how they view the demand. On the supply side, I always have the beef that sometimes NASA has never met new hardware that it doesn't like. Okay, so I worry that we put too much supply instead of making new players use the existing and the first generation or second generation hardware. So often in this business, everybody's fascinated with the hardware, and they're not focused on the demand side. So I wish that there would be more recognition that if a new company comes in and says, we want to put a frame, or we want to put something, say, wait, we got a frame. It could be Nanoracks, or it could be, the Airbus, or it could be, there's just all sorts of different Missy X or something. So, there are frames out there. So I worry that you guys focus too much on the supply. What does that do? It cuts down the use of the existing platforms. What does that do? It lowers the interest on investors. And what does that do? If the investors don't see good returns, they're not as interested in promoting other ideas on the demand side. Okay, on the demand side, I have a beef as well. We're seeing a return to where folks, some in government, think they know what are the right markets. And I don't think that government should interfere with the commercial sector and say, here's the markets we think are the best markets. Okay, sorry about the horns. I'm downtown Washington today, and so we see, for example, we're making a major commitment in Nanoracks into space farming. And we have a 5-year commitment from the Abu Dhabi Investment Office to hire in-space researchers. That's never been done in our industry. Is NASA going to regard that as commercial, even though they're doing basic and applied research? And I think we're going to tip the balance. It's going to be a lot more demand through the partners and through ourselves. So I think we're getting better on demand. I wish we would have more control over the hardware. And it's a very difficult issue for the government to handle.
So you mentioned your partnership with some foreign agencies. I'll say foreign space agency, UAE. I know you've done a whole bunch of international payloads over the last 8 or 9 years. How do you see that in the bigger picture of enabling U.S. leadership in space? Because clearly we have a huge investment in the space station, and we want to use it to its fullest as long as we've got it. How do you see U.S. companies doing business internationally on the station, and where does that fit into what we should be doing, or U.S. leadership, or should that be done? Should that be done on other platforms?
Well, I see that Brian Harvey has asked about the China and the Russian space stations, and are they competing with us? I lost a customer, my first customer that I've lost going to the Chinese space station. And so we're in a competition now. And so I believe passionately that U.S. leadership demands, requires, obligates, that as is true in all industries, that we reach out to international colleagues. And that's how markets mature, and that's how capital flows. Whether it's research, some of the most interesting research projects, of course, are multinational, and even the smaller ones are multinational. We do a lot of payloads that are led by, let's say, a German researcher, or Japanese or Israeli, and there's an American university involved. And there should be no question that these are important ways that we keep not only that soft leadership, American leadership, but it's how we learn and how capital flows. So my hope is that even, we have extraordinary commercial disputes, civil disputes between America and China, not talking about the military, but, how much do we want our supply chains to be dependent on one another? It's a very serious question. We watched Russia and Ukraine separate their supply chains, and that affected us in this business with their launch vehicles and affected us on space station. So the question of the supply chain is different from the question of international partnerships. And I believe passionately that we have to have international leadership. If we don't, we open the door to others to come in and take leadership. And it's just as simple as that. And history tells us that.
Okay, with the few minutes we got left, I want to reflect downstream a little bit. ISS was a government-led, multi-government-led program. We are now bringing in belatedly commercial interests. Exploration is almost certainly going to look very similar. It's inherently expensive and probably inherently governmental. But low Earth orbit platforms are probably not going to look like the same kind of a partnership after ISS is done. So maybe you can give us a little bit of your viewpoints on what the post-ISS partnerships in space would look like. There's probably strategic industry partnerships, but there's almost certainly a role for government in those as well. So I'll let you respond.
One of the legacy, the ISS is the greatest technological marvel of the 20th century. It's also a marvel in another way. Legacy should be how governments and companies work together in frontier markets. Okay, we saw it a little bit with the creation of the internet. From what I've read about how it was funded and how universities took it over, and the rest is history. I think we're on the verge of that chapter, Mike. I think that when we look back as we return to the moon, and we have next few decades of commercial platforms, I think you're going to see partnerships that we never would have dreamt of during, let's say, the space shuttle days or even the ISS days. But we're seeing the first signs of it now, where private companies can work with private companies in other countries under the auspices of their space agencies. Where at Nanoracks today, we have ESA as a customer, we have UAE Space Agency as a customer, and other space agencies around the world. And that, at first, even NASA was a little uncomfortable with that. Okay, what do you mean ESA's a customer? That's not fair. That's not, well, they're behaving as a customer, trust me, because until I produce, I don't get paid. So trust me, they're commercial. And so, and why shouldn't that be the way to go? Because it's the way it goes with airlines and aviation. The government may fund the airports, and the government workers are air traffic safety. Okay, but companies build the planes, other companies sell the tickets. It's this huge public-private partnership we don't question. Oil industry, the federal lands are let out at below market prices, I understand, for private companies to utilize and extract the resources. Huge public-private partnerships between private sectors and the public sector. That's where we're heading, and that's going to be one of the legacies of the ISS. Is that it gently has moved the agencies into behaving more and more as we do in other emerging markets.
And I think that's a perfect way to end this session. So Jeff, thanks for the conversation. Thanks for participating today. The next one, we'll do over a couple of cold beers at my treat.
That's right. I look forward to it. Look forward to it, Mike. Thank you. Thank you to everybody and everybody at Cases as well for inviting me. Thank you.
All right, Jim, over to you.
All right, Jeff, Mike, thank you so much. Markets, investments, partnerships, all fascinating stuff. What a great talk, and what a great lead into our next session, investing in space startups, opportunities and challenges. That's going to start right away. So to attend that, please click on the button, the orange button, and we'll see you over there in just a minute.